And out of nowhere, in my early 40s, things started to get a little bumpier. And I was becoming louder. I was becoming way more emotional than I had ever been before. And I live with brain fog. I have no idea what it is like to not have brain fog or not have memory issues or whatever. I don't know what it's like. I imagine it must be absolutely peaceful and exquisite, right? Because I can tell you there's a lot of chaos in my head, but suddenly it wasn't my normal chaos. It was chaotic chaos.
Welcome back, my lovely listeners, to the Menopause Disruptor podcast. I'm your host, Mary. And if this is the first time that you've tuned into this podcast, I am so happy that you found me. Stick around. This episode is an exciting one. It certainly lives up to the reputation, what this podcast mission is all about, to disrupt the narrative around menopause and just maybe even disrupt the thinking that we have formed as women, our perceptions on menopause that is shrouded in negativity and misogyny and just a lack of information. So in this episode, we're going to get into a topic that is very near and dear to me. It has to do with neurodivergent traits. We've talked about this before in relationship to autism with a previous episode with Dr. Angela Loria. And now we're going to discuss ADHD. Very similar, different traits than autism, but still the way things show up during menopause can have a cascading effect, certainly on our cognitive functions. And in this episode, we're going to dive right in. I am joined by Dr. Jenna Dunlop to discuss cognitive changes that women will experience during menopause in relationship to ADHD, something she didn't discover until her late 50s. She's going to also highlight the challenges that she faced personally working in a corporate world and how menopause exacerbated her cognitive difficulties that she thought she was managing okay as we went along through life. But then estrogen leaves the body and whammo, we are just confronted with a whole host of difficulties that we thought we could manage. Speaking from my own personal experience, and I write about this in my blog, dyslexia. I thought I was managing it pretty good. And then perimenopause, it just got worse and worse and started showing up in ways I couldn't understand nor manage. In our conversation, we will emphasize the need to take greater awareness of how these two conditions intersect. And it doesn't have to be ADHD, any neurodivergent trait, and menopause, as many women may not receive timely diagnosis due to societal pressures to mask their struggles, or quite simply, our medical system just doesn't understand, and sometimes through no fault of their own. But let's not make it all doom and gloom, because in our discussion, Dr. Jenna does share her initiative, helps women incorporate new habits to focus on developing routines and educating women how ADHD and menopause can be well managed if we learn how to stack tasks. This conversation emphasizes the need for self-care and the development of practices and routines that professional women, even women in their personal lives, can use effectively to manage both. I will say that we put a lot of emphasis on women who are professionals, high achieving women, and women who are working in the corporate field. But honestly, this topic is applicable to women no matter where they are in their lives. So if you feel like some of your cognitive functions are taking a real nosedive during menopause, yeah, it might be your perimenopause symptoms. But what's most important is that your doctor have a full and complete understanding of your medical condition and history. If you suspect any ADHD, go ahead, get a diagnosis, lean into your intuition, advocate for your healthcare needs, and get the help that you deserve. Before we begin, here's something you need to know about Dr. Jenna. Dr. Jenna Dunlop is a scientist, educator, public speaker, and writer with a wide variety of expertise, from bats to climate change. Yep, menopause to ADHD. It's no surprise that one of her main passions is making science understandable and accessible to anyone who has an interest, so they can better understand complex information. Dr. Jenna has worn many hats through the years, working at senior levels in government, industry, not-for-profit organizations, and in traditional and virtual education. She returned full-time to researching, writing, and educating when she started to experience highly distressing symptoms of perimenopause. She reviewed the primary science literature on this challenging state of women's life, summarizing information on symptoms and therapies and a website for all women and men to access when they need menopause support. And that website is herstacys.com. It's in the show notes. Getting a diagnosis of ADHD in her late 50s allowed Dr. Jenna to finally understand and accept many of the quirks that make her such a unique individual. Her research to understand the science behind ADHD in women has led her to dedicate herself to service, advocacy, and education for all women experiencing ADHD symptoms, diagnosed or not. Dr. Dunlop completed her undergraduate education in the University of Toronto with a double major in psychology and anthropology, and then achieved her PhD in biology and an MBA, both from York University. Welcome, Dr. Jenna Dunlop. I'm so happy to have you on the show. Just for our listeners, we actually met at a trade show in Abbotsford to share our business, to engage with women, in particular menopausal women. And we just hit it off right away and had so much to share and talk about that we said, hey, come on my podcast, save that thought, share it with the listeners. So welcome.
Thank you for inviting me. I mean, one thing I never have trouble with is talking. So this is just like the perfect fit. I'm a bit preachy when it comes to menopause and ADHD. So it's the perfect forum.
Well, you have quite an interesting journey. It wasn't until your late 50s that you yourself discovered ADHD. Take us down that path to finding out all about ADHD and during the menopausal years.
Right. Well, I've always been quirky is a word that comes to mind. I'm quite loud and boisterous, and yet I'm an introvert when left to my own self. So it just was one of those weird things that I just thought, okay, I guess I'm just like this. I bounce around from thing to thing. I can't seem to get comfortable in any type of job or career choice. So I started out going to grad school, and that changed a couple of times. I couldn't settle. I've never been able to settle. I never thought anything of it. It never occurred to me that there was anything beyond just me at play. You know, it'd be really helpful sometimes if you could see into somebody else's brain. I would have realized how wildly different mine is from most people. I always felt that there was something, I knew that something was off. I just didn't know what it was. And so the only thing that was left to me was to really internalize the fact that there was something like icky and wrong with me. I was constantly trying to be normal and to understand how normal people do things. But of course, this is my normal. There's no other way that you can live except to just be who you are, right? Especially when you don't know that there's anything wrong. So I'm really lucky. There's some good things about ADHD. I've been able, for instance, to follow about 6 of my passions in different careers that I had. And, you know, so I just have learned so much about so many different things. In my bio, it's like from bats to climate change, from menopause to ADHD, right? Like if I like something, then I will find a way to continue working in it. And through all of this, there are some consistencies. So I've always been a very strong writer, which makes sense because writing, there's a little bit of time in between what comes to mind and what you finally send in or what you finally end up sharing. So you have the time to think, go back, check it again, and make sure it sounds okay, which a lot of times verbally, you just, you know, like I am now, you just sound a lot like you're not really sure what you're saying. But I am. It's just that there's a story that's going on in my head at twice the speed that I'm talking about different directions to talk. So bear with me. Yeah, so I was working in policy, which I found actually really interesting. This is a thing for ADHD people, is that we cannot stay for very long in a boring position. You need to have something that kind of jumps around. And so I was in policy, and that was fine. And then I was recruited out to work in oil and gas in Calgary, and that was excellent. I mean, I was really excited. It was a super interesting job. I was working with technology and climate change. And the thing is, the oil and gas industry is a pretty aggressive industry, I think is a nice way to put it. Like things move really quickly. Uh,
Right.
I was at a senior level, expectations are quite high. And there are all of these unspoken rules about how you're supposed to behave, how you're supposed to act. I mean, I think it's probably true in any big company or organization or some sectors, and whether you're in marketing or banking, there are expectations, social expectations. Well, guess what? I didn't know about that. And I would try, oh my God, I would try and try and try to understand what was going on around me. And I couldn't. But I'm smart enough and I laugh a lot and very personable. So I managed to get away with being myself and just 10 times a day saying, tone it down, tone it down.
Yeah.
And out of nowhere, in my early 40s, things started to get a little bumpier. And I was becoming louder. I was becoming way more emotional than
Mm-hmm.
I had ever been before. And I live with brain fog. I have no idea what it is like to not have brain fog or not have memory issues or whatever. I don't know what it's like. I imagine it must be absolutely peaceful and exquisite, right? Because I can tell you there's a lot of chaos in my head, but suddenly it wasn't my normal chaos. It was
Okay.
chaotic chaos. It was really amplified, and my emotions were out of control. I was crying at work all the time, which is just not something that you do when you're an executive. And I was starting to get really sharp. I would snap back at people like, oh, I don't know, my boss, who happens to be the CEO, right? You don't do
Right.
that. And there were a few memorable times, but the last memorable one that I had was when I did actually get into a yelling match with my CEO, wait for it, in public. And I think that you don't need me to tell you
Mm,
how that turned out.
mm.
I left the corporate world and decided that, first of all, I needed to figure out what the heck was going on because this was craziness. It was crazy, crazy. And through all of this, you have to understand I'm going to the doctor on a regular basis. I have suffered from depression in the past due to things that happened in my life. My husband committed suicide about 20 years ago, but
Oh dear.
I was raising my two kids on my own. And so that anxiety was always there. The depression was always there. I had a very good relationship with my doctor. And to this day, it makes me so upset that this young female doctor who is not fresh out of med school, but who wasn't from the prehistoric era either, she never suggested anything about menopause or
Of course.
perimenopause,
Of
right?
course.
There was nothing. There was no information. And when I look back, I look at it and think, I had a flashing neon sign on me saying, I'm in menopause or perimenopause. I mean, it was just, I had all of these classic symptoms.
Yeah.
But with ADHD, I was used to weird things happening to me and I didn't want to tell people. I've always been a flusher. It never occurred to me that wow, I'm getting hot a lot, right? And I would say this to the doctor and they were like, meh, whatever. So basically, I was just left to suffer with
Yeah.
this. And I was on my own in the house, writing, trying to find contracts, trying to stay organized. I mean, all of these things and doing it, feeling like I was blindfolded because
Right.
there was no guidance. I just simply didn't understand what was going on. And it was so bad. And I'll say this because I'm talking to you and this is a podcast, and I hope that I can help anybody who's listening who may have common experiences. But if my husband hadn't committed suicide, I think I would have I would have thought about committing suicide much more seriously. Like I simply
Mm,
couldn't do that to my kids,
mm.
right? So it took that option off the table, but it was so bad. And I was in such exquisite mental agony all the time. And then, of course, I've got physical stuff going on. I've got some joint pain. I've got this. Anyway, it was awful. And I'm doing my research. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Still no mention. I was going in crying to my doctor, like as often as I could go. And she never said perimenopause. My brain explodes when I'm like, how could nobody have thought of offering me hormone therapy, or at least telling me what to do? So anyway, I do my research because that is what I do really well, right? I love my research.
Mm-hmm.
And I stumbled across ADHD with a bunch of my symptoms. And I was like, oh, that's weird. But listen, I'm of the age where ADHD is only affecting boys in kindergarten and elementary school. That is what ADHD is to me and everybody else in my generation, right?
That's
You
right.
think ADHD, what do you think? Little boys, hyperactive, running around, driving people crazy. You don't think of girls ever, and you don't think of adults ever.
No.
So I was like, well, this can't be right. This isn't something that's actually affecting me. That doesn't make any sense. But still, desperation will take us to all sorts of interesting places. So I went into the doctor and I said, listen, can you test me for ADHD? And my doctor went, oh, no, you don't need that. Her exact quote, if you had ADHD, you would know it. That's what she said to me.
Unbelievable.
So I sob, leave the doctor's office feeling like, what do you do when your life is falling apart around you and you get nothing? There's no validation. There's no club I could join. All of my research was saying, oh, you're at that time of life. But even then, it didn't. The other things that go with ADHD did not track with perimenopause. So I really never went in that direction. Anyway, long story short, that doctor went on maternity leave and another doctor came in and I thought, you know what, I'm going to try again. So I did. And I am so freaking ADHD. It's not even funny.
Is that right?
I do the questionnaire and I'm like, yes, extreme through them all. And she's like, oh my. And that at the same day that I finally got this validation, she said, and you know, it could be that you have perimenopause as well. I'm like, at this point, I'm in my 50s. I'm past this, right? It was just ridiculous. And I recognize that doctors have different specialties, but I still think as an MD, you should be able to identify perimenopause and you should be able to identify ADHD.
Should.
Right? I think that's a really basic requirement for a family doctor, especially perimenopause. 50% of your population is going to go through it at some point. What the heck? Some poor middle-aged woman is coming in to talk to you, losing her noodle, and it doesn't occur to you to mention hormone therapy? Oh, anyway, so I ended up there getting validated, a twofer, right? I got validated on the ADHD, but I also got the validation that, oh, now she's telling me that I was probably perimenopausal and that it was this combination of perimenopause and ADHD together that flipped the switch when I was working in the corporate world. And my ADHD symptoms became so much worse, like you said before, amplified, worse to the point where I was not functional. And then I was left with, great, now what do I do? So I do a big gratefulness practice, and I'm very, very grateful for things. And somebody reached out to me, this fabulous woman reached out to me, and she was having a absolutely brutal perimenopause experience. She was like me. Her response was, I need to educate everybody. So she hired me to do something called plain language science, which is to take all of the peer-reviewed science papers and turn them into quote unquote plain language so that people who are not scientists can understand And she has a website that I've done this plain languaging for. It's called herstasis.com.
Right.
And that's what I've been doing for the past 3 or 4 years, is working on all this material and learning so much more about menopause. And at the same time, I was doing all of my research and deep dive stuff on ADHD. And wouldn't you know, ADHD and menopause are absolutely connected. They are a combo. If you go to the female anguish drive-through, you'll find that ADHD is the side order to perimenopause. Could I have the worst experience of my life, but could you throw a little extra in there too?
Oh
I
my
like things
goodness.
spicy. So yeah, that's kind of my story.
Let's get it. Well, first of all, thank you, Dr. Jenna, for being so vulnerable and forthright to tell us exactly your journey. I know a lot of listeners are saying, yep. And how sad that is. I extend my condolences to the loss of your husband. And at the same time, I recognize and respect the suicidal ideation
Yeah,
because it is a real thing. The statistics are showing that one of the highest suicidal rates and certainly suicidal thoughts are women in their late 40s.
yeah.
Gee, why aren't we asking more questions? Why aren't we paying attention to this? And you're right, the medical field has done a real disservice, and that's just the history of misogyny, ignoring women's health, saying it's just like a man's body, but different. But alas, we are discovering that hormones have such a significant role, that role of estrogen in the body. And when it goes bye-bye, if
Mm-hmm.
there's any underlying issues, psychosomatic, physical, mental, emotional, poof, it comes to the forefront. You telling us this story, and I'm sure it's a very common story, is a light bulb moment for a lot of listeners. And I hope that they will really lean into this. But before, just to make it very clear, what is the cross section between or the overlap between those symptoms that are very common that would come up regularly with perimenopause, but could be more amplified if we have a neurodivergent trait, be it ADHD, or autism, for
Yeah.
example, is another neurodivergent trait.
Which, by the way, I also have.
Okay, so let's just pile it all on.
Well, and I'm like, sometimes I'm a little bit too much, right? Maybe I'll just leave the autism on the other side. And for me, it's a secondary thing. It's nowhere near as impairing as the
Okay.
ADHD is. So the overlap in symptoms, the ones that are the most significant are anxiety and depression, cognitive changes. And so that really comes down to concentration, focus, and that's the brain fog, which even though it's not a medical term, it's an excellent term to describe when you're just not there. You're just not quite on top of things the way that you used to be, right? You can't remember stuff as well, that sort of thing. So you've got those, but then there's also the fatigue. Now whether the fatigue and tiredness is from menopause or fighting the world because you're falling apart, who knows? But it's definitely a crossover symptom. The mood changes, the emotional issues are a huge part of ADHD, and
Yeah.
they are a huge part of perimenopause as well. You get these mood swings between I'm really happy, oh no, I'm not. I'm gonna have to throat punch you now, right? So
Exactly.
there's the rage episodes, that sort of thing. And then insomnia and sleep problems. It's very common in ADHD. It's 40 to 60% of women in perimenopause and early postmenopause experience insomnia. And that's a lot of it is primarily tied to night sweats. But so there's a lot of crossover. And even in what I've just described, the anxiety, the cognitive changes, the mood changes, there's, those are very wide fields, right? There's a lot that goes into brain fog. So it's like a continuum. If you just had menopause, then you would have brain fog. But if you have menopause and ADHD, you've got crazy brain fog,
Yeah.
right? And can I just throw out another statistic? For those of you who are saying, oh, well, everybody's got ADHD these days, it's not a real thing. And it's just the latest disorder of the day. The truth is, women have never been diagnosed with ADHD. the fact that there's more information on it now, people, women like myself, are going into their doctors and saying, can you test me for ADHD? And the doctors are saying yes. So it's this entire group who've been suffering their whole lives, but didn't know that it was abnormal.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Didn't know
Bingo.
that there was anything wrong, just kind of assumed that this is how everybody works.
Yeah.
There are two main groups of women who get diagnosed with ADHD later in life. The first are women with children who are being identified at school. So they do the testing, and the moms are taking them to these testings and looking at the questionnaires and saying, hey, I have this. I
Wow.
have this too. Oh my God,
Wow.
I've got this. So that's one. The other main group of women being diagnosed with ADHD are women in perimenopause and early postmenopause who had the experience that I have. Things get so bad, the suffering is so extreme that they turn in desperation to their doctors and end up with an ADHD diagnosis.
Wow.
So
Unless there's a trigger like the child's being tested. And Mel Robbins actually is very forthright, and she shares that too on her podcast. She brought her son in and she looked at the quiz. She says, okay, I got to do this too. And sure enough, discovered ADHD as well as dyslexia, which I have self-diagnosed, but it's certainly a family history and a lifelong learning disability, which is one of those neurodivergent conditions, as I mentioned.
exactly, yeah.
But women were so good at, like you said, thinking that this is just the way, this is ops normal for the world. Or we are very good at masking,
Yeah,
very good at pretending, hiding. I don't have time to deal with this right now. I have my career, I have my children, I have all
yeah,
these other responsibilities. I'll get
yeah,
to that later.
yeah,
And menopause comes along and says, you haven't dealt with this.
yeah.
Just wake up, Cinderella. We got to get to work.
Surprise!
But so thank you again for making that very clear. Those cognitive effects are so amplified. There's been studies done on it. One came out of Carleton University. You as a researcher may know of this one, but I actually had quoted it in my blog post. I'll share that in the show notes. They called it the perfect storm. The amplification of these symptoms and not being able to make sense of it all. And we still have to keep pushing that yardstick in the research. So on that note, you and the work that you're doing, let's take it to something positive. We now have better understanding of ADHD and the cross-section with menopause. It's still very much nuanced and new in the medical practice, but tell us about the work you're doing, not only in your unique program, but with your work that you've been doing. And you told us about that, Her Stacy's, which is a nonprofit organization based here in British Columbia.
Yeah, if you find that website, if you can put that in the show notes, because it's
Absolutely.
a really amazing resource, says the woman who wrote it.
It really is a fantastic website. And
Well, and
yes,
it's
you're right.
beautiful too. They've done such a good job with the website. The research that I do there, really the focus is on what are the symptoms and what are the therapies and treatments. So it goes through the 34 plus symptoms. And for each one of those, there's a section, what can you do with self-care? What kind of therapies and treatments are there? And then for the nerds among us, there's usually a science section at the bottom where it gets a little more complicated if you want to dive in.
Okay.
Because the thing is, the connection between ADHD and menopause is estrogen. And estrogen, when you start getting into internal hormones, endocrine system, anything really about how your body works, it can get complicated really fast. So the science section is where I can take the brakes off a little bit and talk about it. That's what I'm doing. I'm working right now a big piece on supplements, because supplements, as Dickens said, the best of things and the worst of things, right? There's a lot of value in certain supplements for certain people, but there's also an $11 billion industry based on getting people, 11 billion in Canada, that's swamped by what's happening in the US in terms of supplements. And there's all sorts of issues around the regulatory regime that these are tested or not. When you spot test, or when they've spot tested certain supplements, it turns out the ingredients they say are listed may or may not actually be in the supplement. Like, there's a lot of real issues around supplements. But because women are so poorly served by our medical system. Their doctor tells them no, or their doctor's still working on research that came out of the 2002 Women's Health Initiative study on hormone therapy, saying that it gives you a higher risk of breast cancer, which is true for certain populations. But we know so much more now. I mean, 2002, it's 2025 now. Things have changed. We've done a lot more work on this. Hormone therapy is the gold standard. So a lot of these supplements are taking the place of what women should be getting from their healthcare providers. And the other part is that a lot of women, and I certainly support them in this, say, screw it, I'm not going to go to my doctor. I'm getting a naturopath and I'm going to do things naturally. And what's the big difference there? Well, the big difference is that they're heard. I am such a strong supporter of naturopathy. Like, don't get me wrong, but there are a bunch of different ways that you can be a naturopath. And some of them involve going essentially to medical school, but
Right.
others involve printing up a flyer and sticking it in the grocery store and saying, hey, I'm a naturopath. So it really becomes a case of buyer beware. That's the work that I'm doing really is on supplements.
The turning point for you then, Dr. Jenna, when you had the discovery, the diagnosis, you were navigating both menopause, ADHD to say, I need to help women. You mentioned starting to work on this, the website and the work with Her Stacey's, but for you to really branch off as coach, mentor, and helping women navigate through their journey.
I have to tell you the rage that I felt. I mean, for a couple of years, the rage that I had, that I have been allowed to walk through this world for 50 years and 50 years plus, and nobody noticed. My parents didn't notice, the schools did. I have classic ADHD symptoms, right? I mean, I'm not hyperactive, like running around play fighting. I am hyperactive in that I can't sit still. I've never been able to sit still. I can't sit still in meetings. Even when I was in an executive position, I would be squirming. But it's like in school, the problem was that I was a good student. I didn't meet the criteria that people were expecting. And I can understand when I was in school, it was the dinosaurs were roaming sort of thing. And they didn't know, or they didn't think, or it didn't occur to anybody that girls could also have this. It was so very, very nascent research into this. It was like, if you've got ADHD, here's some Ritalin and we'll talk to you later. Right. But my anger, anger isn't right. It was rage. And I said, if I have anything to say about it, there will be no more women who walk around not knowing what's happening to them. Right. And it can't. So I'm just so blessed because I have my own business, Dr. Jenna Dunlop, that works primarily focused on ADHD women, although I'm bringing more menopause in because I'm finding the women who are coming to me, of course, are like me. They're suffering from both. That was the trigger for them to realize I've got to do some research. I've got to figure out what's happening. So I'm working with the menopause and educating women, and then I'm working with ADHD and educating women. And I still, every once in a while, stumble up against that rage. Like when I think about it, when I think about how hard my life was, how severely I was struggling. And trust me, I do not hide things. I mean, I will mask a lot of stuff. My social awkwardness, I would mask very effectively with wine. And it leads to drinking a lot of wine, which is not necessarily healthy. I mean, and that's also, by the way, addiction is a huge ADHD thing because you need to numb. When you don't understand what's happening in the world around you, you know, it's really nice to have a drink at the end of the day or a bottle at the end of the day. It's a bottle of wine, by the way, not a bottle of vodka. Yeah. So I consider myself to be still riding the wave of that final point of enough, right? At least I now have a purpose. And if there's anything that I can do. So I have a course, an online course, and I've priced it at a point that's pretty low, but if you're not sure whether or not you have ADHD, why don't you take this course and you will find out. It goes through,
Okay.
here are the symptoms, here's what the treatments are, and then what I call the handbag. Instead of that friggin' toolbox that everybody talks about, I have an ADHD handbag. But at the same time, everything comes back to, in the same way as with menopause, it comes back to calming your mind, right? Being able to breathe, because
Yeah.
that is what helps with the stress. That is what helps with the overwhelm that happens when you just can't handle it anymore. And so there's a lot of, in there, I have a bunch of stuff, self-awareness, that sort of thing. But I also have free resources for a lot of mind calming and soothing on my website.
And then I also saw on your website about your program, if you care to elaborate, the STASR.
Yeah, it's STASR. It's basically what we're doing is stacking. You stack these tasks on top of each other. So you're looking at whatever the issues are that you're trying to solve by tacking them or stacking them with other habits and routines that you have. That's the R, putting them onto other routines. Then it makes it easier to integrate things into your life. And this is true just for anyone, even if they're tiny things, and turn them into routines.
Nice.
You can get through. So for instance, organization.
Okay. Yes.
Right? Remembering to find your keys.
Uh-huh.
If you can have a routine where you put your keys into, you come home and you always have your keys hanging in one place, or you always put the keys that you need for work the next day, your car and the office keys, you put them into your briefcase.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't focus on turning that into a routine, and it doesn't take very long to turn things into routines. So if you can start stacking, it makes things much, much easier. So everything, basically, you want to break down whatever it is that you need help with. So say you're trying to increase your exercise, which is one of the things for both perimenopause, menopause, and for ADHD. Well, for life, more exercise is good,
Of
right?
course.
So I don't
My
have
favorite topic.
Yeah. But it's a reality that women have difficulty finding time to do exercise, especially at the age of perimenopause. You have everything else going on. You're in charge of the household. You have your career. You've got this. You may or may not be in a relationship, but if you are, that's a lot of work. And trying to squeeze exercise in there can be super difficult. And it's not like make it a priority. Those preachy people who are like, if it was important to you, you'd find the time. Oh, yeah. How about you come and live my life and see how easy that is, right?
That's last kind of a personality, if you will, that a person wants to be coached by. If your coach is,
oh my God.
And unfortunately, that's a lot of male coaches will do that because they see life completely through a different lens.
Well, because they're not doing and I'm not trying to, diss all men, because there are lots of men out there who do stuff, but very, very few men carry the mental load that women carry. We're the ones who are remembering all the appointments. We're buying the gifts for that shower that we have to go to next weekend. We're remembering to do the shopping. We're remembering to stay in touch with all the relatives. And by the way, we also have to have a job that's got a big income, not too big, because that's really hard on the relationship. It just goes on and on and on, the things that women have to do. So finding ways to squeeze some yoga into your morning, right? 10 minutes worth of yoga, which in all fairness, anybody can do. Anybody can do it. But, I have had the experience of being so fatigued and so exhausted that I have unrolled my yoga mat, sat in a chair, cried for a little bit, rolled it back up, and said, But what I do with the STAS-R is say, okay, take that yoga mat, unroll it, take the pressure off. You don't even have to go to the yoga mat. Turn unrolling my yoga mat into the first step of a new routine.
Okay, so the first stack.
The first stack,
Get
right?
it.
So I sit down to turn on my computer in the morning, And of course, I work from home. You'd have to figure out where this would fit for you. And I unroll my yoga mat. And some days I do a 10-minute yoga routine pulled from YouTube, and some days I don't. But I always remember to unroll my yoga mat now. And the thing is that
Nice.
there is a point at which it's like, I got this yoga mat and it's kind of sitting there all alone. And I'm a little bit embarrassed that this is where the furthest I've gotten for the past 3 weeks. So you know what? I'm going to do 3 minutes of yoga. And that's it. You just keep building and building and stacking so that you get things into a routine.
Okay.
And before you know it, once something is a routine, you can then take the pressure off. You don't have to think about it. It's like you throw out the yoga mat, and trust me, I'm a great coach because I never give anybody a hard time about anything. Because why, right? We have enough suffering going on. You don't need to suffer when you're talking to me. But we also, women are invested in everybody else, but we're not so invested in our own self-care. And the internalizing of, oh, I'm so bad, I'm so wrong, I'm so lazy, I'm so this, I never get this done. If you just chip away at stuff, like I am your biggest cheerleader, I'll work through with you what it is that you need to do and what it is that you want to do. Sometimes those are the same thing, right? Sometimes they're not. That's okay. But if you know that you have to eat certain types of food because of a health issue, but you just can't get there, I mean, making changes a little tiny bit at a time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's sort of much like the SMART goals.
Yeah,
Specific, measurable, you keep it
exactly.
relevant, time bound.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a nice way to look at it in terms of, oh, I told myself in so much time frame, I got to do this, the SMART goal. But with the STAS R, it's more like, oh, step one, like that 1%. Can I do 1 more percent, one more activity? And then over a set period of time, you've stacked enough of these actions that you have given yourself a routine. Very clever.
Yeah.
Which I would imagine for the ADHD mind is exactly the way it needs to function. Am I right?
Routines are the saving grace for
Yes.
ADHD. Anything that you can take out of the I have to think about it category and put into this is just how this goes category, it's not just that it saves time, it's saving the self-flagellation. It's saving that little voice in your head that starts to talk about, oh, you always say you're going to do stuff and you never do. You're such a loser. You're so bad. These are the voices that I've grown up with. Just because I have my routines now doesn't mean that I don't talk that way to myself. I just don't talk that way to myself very often at all anymore.
Yeah.
So they go together, being able to have routines and routines for everything. The things that you find the most problematic. I mean, procrastination, oh, that's a huge ADHD thing. And when you get brain fog and you throw procrastination in there, that's really hard. But if you can figure out what is it that I'm procrastinating and what are my strengths? What can I do to help make sure that I get done what I get done? We're indoctrinated, because that's just how life goes, with thinking the rules for most are going to be the rules for me. So and when I say that, I mean, like, you're in school and you're supposed to just be able to sit and do stuff. Some people can't sit and do stuff. But the way that school works, as you're growing up and as you learn, that's the only option that you get offered. You don't get offered a different option on how to get things done. So there's a whole huge piece here about having to accept who you are and being aware of who you are, because for all that ADHD can just be horrible, it also has a lot of strengths with it. Very high creativity. ADHD has nothing to do with IQ. I ended up with a PhD in biology, and it's certainly, I'm not affected by not being bright enough. I'm more affected by not being able to concentrate on the same thing for any period of time, if that makes sense.
Yes. And I'm particularly, because you and I both, professional careers, corporate careers, and very complex jobs in very demanding roles, you as a researcher. How then can women, listeners, take some of the guidance and advice and say, I'm still a professional. I'm still working corporate. I still have to show up and perform 9 to 5, whatever those hours might be. And now I've got the amplified effects of menopause, perimenopause. What are some of the techniques that STAS-R could be used, you can use with that method to help women in their professional lives so they don't have to give up on themselves, their career, their ambitions, and just keep going in their professional lives? Because let's face it, a lot of women, we're at that age where we will be at the pinnacle of our careers and up for promotions, because
Right.
45, 55 years old is, you're really kind of hit the peak of that career progression.
Well, there's a couple of different things. First of all, there's two real paths that we're talking about here. One, the career focused tasks that need to be done, right? For you
Right.
to succeed, you need to figure out how to deliver things when you say you're going to deliver them, right? You need to show up, and there are some crazy things. Like, I don't know if you realize this, but poor personal hygiene can be an issue for people with ADHD because we just don't care, right? This is a podcast. You guys can't see me, but I have a brush cut. Well, you can go to my website and see me. Why? Because I just don't care. And it's too much work. The amount of space in my head that I save by not having to worry about my hair is amazing, right?
Yeah.
So there's some basics about, I need to get things done. I need to look appropriate. I need to show up and be ready, because a lack of preparation is another very common, like, it's not just procrastination. There are a lot of times you can get stuck in a game of solitaire with ADHD if it's hitting that dopamine receptor, and you can be doing that and then not have read the agenda for a meeting that you're chairing, right? Which is always a very awkward look. So there's a bunch of nuts and bolts. Here's what I need to learn how to do better. And then Stasser can come in and help with that. But the other stuff, and I think it's much, much more important, is self-acceptance, self-confidence, being able to effectively take a step back when you're feeling flustered, instead of just blah, 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 right? Typically, if you get stressed when you have ADHD, you're just going to talk louder and you're going to talk faster. So having the awareness to realize, take a break, right? And so things like when you get these rage episodes that happen, or big emotions that happen, and you can turn on a dime, being able to have the skills involved in recognizing that that's happening, and knowing before you do it, ask me how I know, before you do it, you need to step back, and then sometimes making an excuse. Oh, I just have to go to the washroom before I hit this meeting. Or, oh, hang on a sec, I just forgot something in my office. Anything to put a few minutes or seconds, even sometimes, of space in between whatever reaction you're about to have, just so that you can pull back. If you have the skill to do a quick 2 or 3 deep breaths and calm yourself, right? If you have the skill to be mindful, because that whole inattentive part of ADHD means I can be talking to you. It's definitely happened in some very senior meetings that I've been in, where I just completely tune out. Yes. And then all of a sudden I realize people are waiting for me to say something, and I literally have no idea just what happened. But in order to manage those sorts of things, you need to have the awareness of how it works, like how you work. Think of it like there's some dogs, therapy dogs, that can sniff out a seizure before it happens. It's like you need to develop your own therapy dog that can sniff out when you're about to do something.
Yeah.
There's always a sign. There's always something. But most of us, we don't live in a culture that really supports learning about mindfulness and implementing mindfulness. So a lot of people are coming at it much later, and you need to practice it. It doesn't work right away. If you still have to go to work and you have to perform, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, unfortunately, whether you have ADHD or whether you're in perimenopause, you need to protect yourself. And by doing that, you need to fill your handbag with whatever skills are going to allow you to move forward without really causing any big rifts. So really there's a whole bunch of like mental things that you can do, and then there are other like actual hard skills that you can do, work skills. Did that make sense?
100%. It
Okay.
actually did, because my spin-off from that question is, are you doing work in corporate organizations, bringing this to the C-suite and managers and just getting that knowledge out
Not
there?
yet. I would like to. And in true ADHD form, I've just been putting it off. And it's something I think that is really, really important. And speaking of this, maybe I will just make up a free webinar or something and hand it out to different HR offices and say, here, please just watch this and
Yeah.
get back to me, because hiring people, new people, is really expensive. Offices don't want to do that. It's way better for an organization to say, we'd like to take care of the staff we have.
Exactly.
And you can't tell who's neurodivergent just by looking at them. My courses are usually covered by, what are they, the extended health benefits.
Right.
But in there, there's usually a whole bunch of support tools that employees can go and use and take advantage of them.
You're right. It's about protecting the staff you already have. This is
Yeah.
your corporate knowledge. Why would you throw that away? Or put a woman in a position where she doesn't feel safe enough to discuss what's going on in her head, let alone being able to recognize, like, if she can just feel supported and confident enough to have those conversations and say, I'm a little bit off today, bad night of the hot flashes. Can I check in at work at 11 and I'll stay till 6 or what have you? This
Yeah.
should be the norm. The 9 to 5 is so outdated. We're starting to realize we're more neurodivergent, or we're more in a hormonal transition than not, because again, like I said, we're right at that age group, 40 to 60 perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah. So getting that education is so critical, I think, to
Well,
support
and I mean, it's
professionals.
just, to me, my heart just breaks for all of the women out there who don't know and don't understand what's happening to them.
Exactly.
And they don't have resources available to them. It's why everything I do is on a sliding scale, including my courses. I don't want anybody to not be able to access help and support if they need it. And that's just the way that I think the world should be. Flexibility is so natural to me because I'm very much productivity based. Women have to camouflage and mask and cope and be flexible around a system that really was not designed for them. It's designed by men for men. You just look at the issues with childcare. That's opening a whole different kettle of fish. But women have been coping and managing for so long that this is just one more thing that they can throw into that bin, like into the bucket of stuff I have to cope with. But if you give them tools, they will cope.
Exactly. Give them the permission to explore and realize it's okay to not feel okay, because there could very well be a valid reason behind that. And I think that knowledge is power.
But unfortunately, it's not always okay to do that in our systems. It makes me sad.
However, what would be a piece of advice you would give to women right now, whether they're in the corporate executive positions or just simply managing life at home? What would be something that they could lean into right now, having listened to this, be suspicious that they too may have ADHD or another neurodivergent condition, so they can feel a little bit more empowered to move forward?
Well, honestly, the biggest thing is to really honestly lean into believing that everything is going to be just fine and that you are just fine as you are. That sounds so hokey, but it is so, so true. We get ourselves in such a twist about things. And it's like, honey, it's okay. And you're okay. All we can do is just live. And so trying all this work to not be who we are just is really time consuming and not very effective. But this too shall pass, whether it's something happening in the moment or in the hour or in the week or whatever. It will all pass.
Beautiful. Oh, it was so endearing. Our mess is our message. We go through the ugliness so that we can help transform somebody else because we've lived those pain points. And so I'm so grateful for you for sharing your story and your method. We'll make sure that that is shared in the show notes. So Dr. Jenna Dunlop, well, pleasure to have you.
Oh, it was such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
For me, this episode with Dr. Jenna Dunlop was very powerful and very insightful. Many aha moments. And I think for a lot of listeners who've been wondering if there's something more than just their menopause symptoms, perhaps some underlying neurodivergent condition or trait that they suspect but may not have had diagnosed, this could shed some new light on how you approach your menopause journey. More importantly, how you would treat it. So here are my key takeaways from today's episode. Number 1, the power of self-acceptance. If you're a neurodiverse woman navigating menopause, you're working with a unique set of tools. And that's not just okay, it's your superpower. Both attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and menopause are natural parts of who you are, and they are not battles to be won. Number 2, understanding the double impact. Menopause can intensify ADHD symptoms due to hormonal changes. Many women often will receive their ADHD diagnosis later in life, particularly during menopause. The combination can affect career goals, career trajectory, and personal relationships. Workplace challenges can become more pronounced during this transition due to the nuanced and complex intersection between both perimenopause and a neurodivergent trait. Number 3, many women struggle to articulate their needs, especially during major life transitions. It is so important to tune in both to the signals from your body and from your mind. Lean into that inner knowing, your intuition. You know, there's so many misconceptions in society about ADHD that have led to a significant loss in talent and creativity in the workforce. This is not okay. So it's so critical to seek proper support and education. Number 4, connection is key. Disconnection is often at the root of ADHD-related challenges, and the menopause transition can amplify feelings of isolation and feelings of loneliness. What do women do? We retreat. We hide. We remove ourselves from community, from society, in order to cope. This, too, is not okay. Building support systems is crucial during this time. You must understand, though, you are not alone in this journey. And so moving forward, my last point, number 5, ADHD and even menopause is not a life sentence. It's an opportunity to take a different approach, a different way of experiencing the world. There are so many practical techniques to manage, to cope, and self-acceptance is at the foundation to developing new strategies to not just survive, but to thrive. And to help women thrive at this stage in life, I'm a big advocate for this. Workplace understanding so that we can create workplaces where we can carry out conversations and accommodate women through this very significant but natural phase in their life. To sum up, bracing both ADHD and menopause can be a transformative life experience. Work with someone who's got your back, someone like Dr. Jenna, who's walked that journey. Her pain points are your pain points. You can find more about Dr. Jenna Dunlop on her website, drjennadunlop.com. She has many resources and training coming out called Taming Your ADHD, a transformative 3-unit course designed to help you take control, build resilience, and create the life you should be living. In this course, you'll learn how ADHD is influenced by your hormones, especially estrogen, what ADHD coexisting conditions are, and if you should be screened, how to manage sleep struggles and set your sustainable routines. You'll also learn about meditation, mindfulness, self-awareness, and self-compassion techniques, and a step-by-step guide to create your personalized ADHD resilience plan. Again, you can find that all on Dr. Jenna's website, drjennadunlop.com. Some other important resources that I want to share, herstacys.com for evidence-based information and a whole host of resources and practical tips for navigating both ADHD and menopause together. And then in this episode, we didn't talk about favorite books, but I did read a couple of books. 2 of them are listed here, A Radical Guide for Women with ADHD by Sari Solden and Michelle Frank, and then ADHD 2.0 by Edward Hollowell and John Ratty. I want to leave you with this final thought. Your journey through menopause isn't about fixing what's wrong. It is about embracing your unique way of experiencing the world. With the right support, understanding, and self-compassion, you can navigate this transition while honoring your neurodiverse nature. Stay connected with those who can help you build community and seek the support so you can navigate this journey as the wise woman that you are. If today's insights resonated with you, I'd love for you to be part of our growing community of menopause disruptors. Hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening right now. And if you know someone who can benefit from these conversations, please share this episode. Sometimes a simple act of sharing can be the first step in someone's healing journey. And hey, if you're ready to take the next step in your menopause journey, I'm here to support you. You can find all my services, including my comprehensive menopause intelligence digital course, one-on-one coaching programs, and workplace education services at mlcoaching.com. It's in the show notes. Follow me on Instagram at Menopause Disruptor Podcast, where I share tips, insights, and real conversations about navigating this transformative phase of life. Let's continue to disrupt this menopause conversation together. Remember, midlife should be the best life, and it will be. Namaste.